This is a short story about a drive I did in 1977 from Kuwait to Reading in the UK, and it's entitled 4,000 Miles in 7 Days Solo, or An Idiot in a Fantastic Car. It was stupid to leave Kuwait with no one knowing that I'd set off. It was stupid to be doing it alone, and now I was about to do something even more stupid. I didn't want to retrace my route back to the nearest town. I couldn't stay where I was because it was too cold, and I didn't want to run the engine without going somewhere because I didn't know where I'd find the next fuel. So I carried on up the mountains. It started to snow. Not just a light fall, but a blizzard. By the time I reached the high level plateau at the top of the mountains, the snow was blowing horizontally. The only way I knew where the road went was because there were queues of lorries parked or stuck in the snow. I knew not which. With headlights full on in case there was something coming the other way, I crept along passing the lorries. It must have been the sheer weight of the car that made the wheels grip, but grip they did. And let me tell you that a heavily laden Mercedes 280 SL will get you through snow like a 4x4. I don't recall how long the blizzard lasted, but it was a long time before the sky brightened and the snow stopped. The landscape was white everywhere, and now I could see wheel tracks marking the road. I was able to pick up speed a little, and a while later caught up with a bus. It was having a difficult time sliding around in the semi-packed snow. Together we came to a downward slope, and I held back in fear of sliding into the back of the bus. Together we came to a downward slope, and I held back in fear of sliding into the back of the bus. When all was well, and we started to climb up the other side of the shallow valley. Suddenly, and for no reason that was obvious at the moment, the bus slid sideways and fell sideways into the ditch that ran alongside the road. The moment he was off the road, the reason became more than obvious. Sliding down the hill towards me was a four-wheel lorry loaded with steel hanging over the back. It was coming straight at me, sideways on, so that the steel hanging over the back of the lorry was going to smash into the front of my car. I froze, petrified. By the time my time had come, of that I was sure, but somewhere, someone was looking after me. The lorry approached, and the result seemed obvious, but at the last second it straightened up, went into a skid and spun round the car, ending up facing backwards, but behind me. I'd been watching all this happen and was more than a little relieved when I watched in the rearview mirror as it spun and finally stopped. I thanked whoever it was who'd saved me, then looked ahead. There was a second lorry, identical, coming down the hill, doing just the same. Excuse the language, but I probably said something like, "Oh shit." However, once again, the same thing happened. It went into a skid, spun round the car. There was nothing following that one, so I got out of the car and walked back to the bus. I say walked. I would guess that an observer would have said more like staggered. My legs were like jelly. The bus driver and the two lorry drivers who had joined us assured me, as best they could, that there was nothing I could do and that I should continue on my way. I waited a while whilst my nerves calmed and I felt able to drive once more. Soon the sun was shining, the sky was blue, and the world a better place than it had been a while earlier. Several people had offered me some useful bits of advice along the way, and the lorry driver I had taken tea with in the queue waiting to get it out of Turkey and into Syria had told me, very seriously, don't have an accident in Turkey. If you do have an accident, don't say anything until you have an interpreter, and heaven forbid you kill anyone in the countryside, because the locals will hang you first and hold the trial afterwards. Now with that in mind, I took extra care. I drove on carefully until I came to a slope at the bottom of which was a village. There was no sign of a road, just several tracks in the snow, which seemed to go everywhere. So I just started slowly down the slope. About halfway down, I saw a young boy standing, so I turned a little to give him a wide berth. I don't know what happened, but the car, which had behaved so well through all the blizzard conditions, went into a skid. I had no control. I was sliding sideways down the slope straight towards the little boy. For the second or third time that day, I watched as my life to date flashed through my mind. The boy stood frozen as the car slid towards him. There was a bang and a bump which threw the car away from the boy. The rear of the car spun to the right and all the way round, so that the car ended up sliding past the boy backwards. Now tell me, there is no such thing as guardian angels. I managed to right the direction of travel without stopping. Drove through the village shaking like a belly dancer, but all over, not just the belly, and stopped when I was well clear of anyone who might have seen what had happened. In the rearview mirror I could see the little boy had simply turned and watched me go. Once again I lit the primer stove, and this time it took 2 cups of tea with powdered milk before I was able to continue. I had about 100 miles to go before Ankara, and I needed a proper meal, a good wash and freshen up. I arrived there about mid-afternoon, with no map of the city, no idea where I could find what I wanted, and with the abandoned manner with which the locals drove, I decided on heading for the airport, not the city centre. I should find what I wanted there, and did. I had my heart set on a really good night's sleep in a comfortable bed with a really good hotel. In my previous job, I had often visited Istanbul on business and had always stopped at the Hilton, the old Hilton. It was the first Hilton built outside the USA and the first of the big, although by comparison it's not so big now, hotels in Istanbul. It overlooks the Bosporus and the first Bosporus Bridge, the link between Europe and Asia. The entrance to the hotel from the road winds through beautiful gardens. The inside is tastefully decorated and the rooms are very comfortable. I had this picture in my mind as I made my way back to the car from the airport building where I had washed, changed and eaten. The facilities were poor, dirty and not at all what you would expect in an international airport these days. I'm quite sure it must have improved since then. Istanbul was about 250 miles along the road. There was no snow here, so the going should be good, I thought. Silly me. The roads were terrible, the traffic heavy, the standard of driving absolutely ridiculous. It rained in torrents, and when it wasn't raining, it was foggy. The going was slow and tiring. My eyes started to ache with the strain and my nerves were on end due to the stupidity of the other drivers, overtaking on blind bends, coming at me from the wrong side of the road as they overtook and generally acting like accidents looking for somewhere to happen. It was probably the most unpleasant stage of the journey, but eventually, there ahead of me was the famous bridge, the Europe-Asia link over the Bosporus. It must have been after 10 p.m. when I parked outside the entrance to the Hilton Hotel. I checked in, went to my room, picked up the phone and dialed room service. 2 smoked salmon sandwiches, 2 whiskies on the rocks and 2 glasses of cold milk, please, I ordered before running a deep, hot bath. My order arrived as the bath filled, and armed with my 2 smoked salmon sandwiches, 2 large whiskies and 2 glasses of cold milk, I lay in the bath, soaking my aching bones and devouring the best meal I'd had for what seemed like an age. That night I slept very well. No morning call, I decided. Wake up when you will and never mind the bill. It was 11 a.m. the next morning when I finally awoke. I opened my eyes and closed them again as quickly as possible. They were so sore it was painful, as if someone had thrown a bucket of sand in them. After a shower, I made my way down to the hotel shop. Unfortunately, they had some eye wash, which I took back to the room and bathed my eyes for a while, then ventured out again to enjoy a real Hilton-style snack in the restaurant. My eyes were still very sore, and I wondered if I'd be able to continue that day. I've been driving for 3 days with just little sleep in the car for 2 nights. I needed a rest, but I also wanted to get going again. Winter was setting in, Christmas not far off, and I wanted to be back to see my 2 daughters. I wandered round the gardens for a while until my eyes were able to make out details properly, and then made the decision. Back to the room, gathered up that which I'd taken in, down to reception, paid the bill, and still wondering if I was doing the right thing, got in the car. At the planning stage, I had it in mind to follow the TIR route through what was then Yugoslavia, but looking again at the map, I changed my mind and decided to go through Hungary. It was about mid-afternoon when I drove off from the Hilton Hotel grounds and headed for the border with Bulgaria. Crossing the border proved no problem at all, and by night I had arrived on the outskirts of Sofia. It was late, so I just found somewhere to park and once again slept in the passenger seat. There was a cafe nearby when I awoke at some crazy hour early in the morning, and there I broke my fast with egg and an unusual type of salami and washed it down with strong coffee. Next was to be Belgrade, which I skirted around and kept on towards the Hungarian border. I was making great time. The car was running well. That lovely German had made a wonderful job of the engine. And after my night in the Hilton at Istanbul, my very favourite best hotel, I felt ready for anything. But still I decided to have another night in the car. What I didn't know was that I needed an advance visa to get into Hungary. That was something I discovered when I reached the border control. It was the expected long queue of TIR lorries. I didn't see a British one. I parked and walked to the office building. It was then that I was told I should have obtained a visa in advance. Not verbally so much, as a lot of arm waving and loud voices from a couple of uniformed persons. It seems that it's not just the British that think a foreigner will understand if you shout the words.